French historian Emmanuel Todd has given a major interview on Trump's America. Emmanuel Todd, the author of The Defeat of the West, has offered a shrewd analysis that has been called out by Pepe Escobar and viewed by more than 400,000 people. The interview video, is 2 hours long and in French. So in this video, I'm going to summarize that down to 4 key points for you about defeat, dislocation, decadence, and the dilemma of Trump's America and Trump's West. I'm Jeff Rich, and this is the Burning Archive channel, which focuses on history and how it helps us understand the global shifts in power and culture that are happening today all around the world. Emmanuel Todd's The Defeat of the West is a great example of such history. In that book, he said that the West suffered a strategic defeat, not so much because of what Russia or China has done to the West, so much as the internal changes in society and culture in the West. He builds on these ideas in this interview with a French YouTube channel. He provides a really clear analysis of the historical situation facing Trump as he becomes President of the United States. Defeat, dislocation, and decadence. I have a link to our video in the description below, so why don't you go down there, bookmark the video, and subscribe and like this video if it's giving you some worthwhile information as well. And if you're new to Emmanuel Todd, you can also find in the video description below my playlist, my other videos on Emmanuel Todd's Defeat of the West, including explaining all the main ideas of the book in English. This book has not and likely will not be translated into English. So the first key idea that Emmanuel Todd has is that America is a defeated country. At the 12-minute and 25-second mark of the video, Emmanuel Todd points out that not only Ukraine but the USA have been defeated in its war against Russia. The key fact on the ground, facing world diplomats, facing political leaders, facing the new President of the United States, that needs to be considered is that America is a defeated country. He says, and this is the translation, the auto-translation from the French video, it's a major defeat for the United States. So it's the end. In fact, it's the end of their control of the world. And Trump arrives and he is victorious in the American presidential election, but he arrives as president of a defeated country who will have to digest this defeat. In fact, as we know from Trump's inauguration speech, which had not been delivered when Emmanuel Todd gave his interview, the new president is showing no sign of digesting that defeat. He remains in denial. He remains certain that America is not in decline, that its greatest years are ahead of it, and he clearly has not read Emmanuel Todd's book. He wants to pretend that he is not a defeated country, that he can be the peacemaker, the deal maker, when in fact he is the leader of a country that has been defeated. The second major point that Emmanuel Todd makes in this excellent interview is about dislocation. The defeat of the West has short-term and long-term causes, and Todd generally focuses on the long term. He is a demographer, after all, who writes in the annals tradition of the longue durée, the long duration of time, the big, slow changes in society and culture that influence political decision-making and other events. And in Emmanuel Todd's book, he explains in a way how this defeat has been a long time coming. I explain that more in my other videos. But it's clear that the US and Western leaders around the world today are struggling to share Emmanuel Todd's vision of their defeat. And when you cannot face reality, reality takes its revenge. This is the dislocation, the confusion, the uncertainty about the place in the world of America and the West that Emmanuel Todd is describing by the term dislocation. He says that commentators need to stop being so, Western commentators that is, need to stop being so narcissistic and see American responses in the context of defeat. He even compares the 21st century war of the West against Russia, culminating in the events since 2022, the sanctions war from hell and all the rest of it. He compares it to Napoleon's disastrous 1812 invasion of Russia. It failed, and the West's eastward expansion of NATO to effectively culturally invade Russia, if you like, has failed as well. And in the retreat, in their defeat, the West is now being encircled. In this situation of dislocation, leaders panic and do not act like rational actors, as so many international relations theorists and scholars like to try to talk about. Like so many people on YouTube who espouse a realist point of view like to talk about. And Emmanuel Todd makes the point that in this context of dislocation, there is no point looking for coherence in Trump's plan or in the United States plan or in NATO's plan. There is no coherence. What one needs to do is realise that leaders are improvising, making chaotic decisions, divided decisions, bad compromises, and dislocated decisions in the context of defeat and a withdrawal from their aggressive eastward expansion of NATO. Expecting Trump to have a plan, expecting Trump to, come up with the miracle peace plan to solve the Ukraine war in a day or 100 days or 6 months or 4 years is simply delusion. To expect that the Western leaders can just return to realistic great power foreign policy is similarly delusional. They have lost sight of where they are in the world. And this has real consequences for the broader trends. At 34 minutes and 40 seconds in the interview, Emmanuel Todd says this kind of decision-making is going to accelerate the decline and the collapse. A minute later in the interview, Todd says that American and Western response, all the crazy plans to freeze the conflict and to solve the war through some strange deal, must be interpreted as erratic reactions to a situation of humiliation. I'll say that again. It's very crucial to, Todd's assessment of the situation. They must be interpreted as erratic reactions to a situation of humiliation. America is lashing out at its allies and attacking Europe. It's butching up against Denmark over Greenland. It's calling Spain a BRICS country. It's imposing tariffs on anyone who defies Donald Trump's will. And this is causing havoc, and it's in Emmanuel Todd's view, only going to accelerate the decline and the collapse of the American leadership system. America is, if you like, cannibalizing its European allies. And as Emmanuel Todd points out, this is not really in the US interest, because the United States is more dependent on the European economy than it is dependent on the Chinese economy. And it simply does not have the industry, education system, workforce or demography to do the kind of protectionist industry policies to expand its share of world manufacturing and industrial output in the way that Donald Trump envisages. And Todd says, and this is one of the most potent lines in the interview, he says, Europe and other Western allies like Australia are responding like a servant being abused by a master who has lost his mind in a violent rage, and they are trying to find rational explanations for irrational behaviour. They're behaving, Todd says, like a servant who seeks an explanation for the erratic behaviour of the master. And I think one has seen over the last couple of months over on YouTube and other independent media platforms, a lot of the people who were deeply opposed to Biden's foreign policy and so forth are similarly desperately hoping to seek some coherent, realist explanation in the erratic behaviour of the new President of the United States. The third big theme identified by Emmanuel Todd in this interview is decadence. And this argument links up to his broader historical argument in The Defeat of the West about the collapse of the democratic ethos, the leadership ethos in the West, the loss of collective belief in a state of zero religion, which is one of the major arguments in his book, the loss of collective belief, the loss of moral character, if you like, of the leadership elite in the West, and the oligarchical and nihilistic leadership of the American elite in particular. He presents the United States in The Defeat of the West as a kind of imploding black hole, but he does not interpret the problems that the West is encountering as a division between nationalists and globalists, as is very popular in what Emmanuel Todd somewhat jokingly refers to as the Nationalist Conservative International, as a reference to the old Communist International, Socialist International of the 20th century. Rather, he sees every country, every nation experiencing its own particular version of social fragmentation, internal dislocation, driven by some common trends such as educational stratification, but surfacing in different ways. Overall, he argues the cultural implosion or decadence of the West means that there is no guiding principle in the West's response to defeat. And this is especially acute in the United States, that has come to believe its own myths about the unipolar world, despite all the fundamental changes in the distribution of talent, ideas, resources and power around the world. So at 55 minutes and 33 seconds in the interview, he says the West has suffered a military economic defeat, not direct but substantial. An effective Western leadership would face this reality. War is a reality test, Emmanuel Todd says at the start of his book, and the war in Ukraine has demonstrated that the West no longer faces reality. He says the first thing to do when we are in a situation of defeat is to acknowledge we no longer make the rules of the game. But that is not happening, is it? And then he goes on to say, we are in the process of an adaptation to a Western world that is shrinking. The countries outside the Western world, unlike us, by which he means Europe, are not under the influence of the Americans and see its decline. And he refers to the growing organisation, the growing membership and the growing cohesive power of the BRICS countries, which have recently been joined by Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim country and Australia's closest neighbour, and by Nigeria, I think the largest by population country in the African continent. So he says at a key point in the interview, I would say I always try to bring the analyses of history to just explain the background of what he was saying back to this sequence. It is defeat, dislocation, decadence. And this is the dilemma of Trump's America and Trump's West. This is the code that is governing how Trump responds to defeat and how the world, both in and outside of the American alliances of the West, respond to American denial of defeat, American denial of decline. The belief expressed by Donald Trump in his inauguration address defiantly that America is not in decline. In fact, he said, American manifest destiny and its pioneer spirit, evoking memories of William McKinley and Teddy Roosevelt, will enable the USA to plant the stars and stripes to Mars, and a big call out to Elon Musk in that part of Donald Trump's speech. Contrary to that kind of rhetoric, Emmanuel Todd says in this incredibly important interview that the question of the year, this year 2025, is will the West accept its defeat in Ukraine, and how will this war be resolved? There is no sign yet that they are. Rather, Emmanuel Todd comments that the incoherent responses remain caught in bitter responses to national humiliation. The Americans are turning in their humiliation in resentment against their European allies, channeling long established tropes of the decadent, lazy, welfare-dependent Europeans who don't pay enough for all those American bases established in their countries. And Emmanuel Todd points out that some of Elon Musk's recent comments about European leaders simply reflect a broad sentiment across the American leadership class that is really quite contemptuous of its European allies. His interview has caught 400,000 views in part because I suspect there is a growing sense within Europe that they're a little bit sick of the snootiness from America, but I might be wrong. In any case, Todd emphasises that the American elites really do despise Europe, but they despise Europe partly out of envy and resentment. He points out that there is currently a 5-year gap in life expectancy, the most fundamental measure of a success of a society, between the United States and Europe. And the announcements by Donald Trump since Emmanuel Todd did his interview and his calls with European and other leaders only accelerate this analysis, will only confirm Todd's analysis that there is a desire to humiliate in response to national humiliation. Yet he points out that they are bound to fail. He has some very shrewd remarks on the USA's complete dependence on production from Europe and East Asia, and the differences of the American situation now and in the period where protectionist policies beloved by Trump actually worked, arguably back in the 1890s. But he also has some telling and insightful remarks about how he, when he wrote about Trump in 2016 and 2017, had wished the intellectuals of the West would wake up to the changes in society and the weaknesses of political culture to which Donald Trump was a response, but in which those same intellectuals are now trapped. His sympathies are essentially that of a democratic centre-leftist political tradition that arguably died in the West sometime in the 1990s, especially after the explosion of belief in the American unipolar moment. And he remarks tellingly for this time that there are moments in history when actors, leaders of states, political actors, are not completely rational. Realism, as espoused by John Mearsheimer and a lot of geopolitics channels, simply won't help. What needs to help is a sense of reality grounded in history that will provide a real sense of what's going on in this particular place, this particular time, with these particular characters, with all their mixed motivations. And Emmanuel Todd is absolutely one of the best thinkers in the world around at the moment to help you reimagine the reality of this changing world with history. You know, back in 2023, I wrote a piece in Pearls and Irritations at johnmenadue.com called The Crooked Timber of an Unhappy, Dangerous American Empire. In it, I wrote this: all happy empires are alike. Each unhappy empire is unhappy in its own way. Of course, that's a reference to the first sentence of Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. But unhappy empires are dangerous. So much depends today on the unique, unhappy way of the American empire. Emmanuel Todd helps us understand that unique, unhappy way of the American empire. And I'm going to be republishing my piece, The Crooked Timber of an Unhappy, Dangerous American Empire, over at my Substack, jeffrich.substack.com, as part of my world history tour of 5 world powers, starting with America. So, and if you join my Substack as a paid subscriber, and you'll get that article, all my discussion, my weekly insights into world history and world affairs, and you'll also get my recent post-1945 world history guide and my complete guide to Emmanuel Todd's Defeat of the West. So go to jeffrich.substack.com, become a subscriber, and while you're doing that, why don't you click on this video here, especially if you're new to Emmanuel Todd and you'd like to understand his ideas better. Thanks for watching.